Feudalism Project, the Great Pyramid Scheme of Land Ownership and Loyalty. Feudalism describes how society was structured around land ownership and loyalty in the Middle Ages. A vassal was someone who received land, known as a fief, from their lord in exchange for an oath of loyalty and military service. These vassals could, in turn, proportion out this land for the same exchange, building a larger group of those loyal to the lord above them all. Feudalism began when Charles Martel introduces the lord and vassal structure in the 8th century. Between the 10th and 12th centuries, we see the height of European feudalism, which is predominantly Christian and is largely influenced by the church. During the 12th and 15th centuries, military service was often purchased, and money-based economy became favored over the land-based economy, causing the decline of feudalism. Knights began their appearance in the 8th century during Charlemagne. Knights were needed by the king because of how chaotic the feudal system would operate. However, technology started improving, and knights weren't needed in combat near the 15th century. We talked about the different types of people that fell into place during the feudal system. However, knights were different. A duke, count, or baron were born into their feudal class based on their parents. A knight typically wasn't born into his own feudal class and must earn his title. There are two ways to become a knight. The first way is a soldier in the military that outshines his peers in battle. This is when a king or even a lord can grant them knighthood. The second way someone can become a knight is to become an apprentice towards another knight. A knight would also have to supply his own armor for battle. The first requirement of a knight was someone who could afford a knight's weapons, armor, and a war horse. These knights could also own land just like a duke or a count. However, the land that they owned was usually smaller. The king would appoint a knight with laborers to work for very little money. In return, the knight would grant the king exceptional military service and taxes. Some of the taxes could be crops from the land that they owned. Bertrand de Born was a knight during the 12th century and wrote poetry about his life as a knight. In one of his poems, he talks about the duties of a knight being in warfare. For no man is held to be worthy until he has taken and given many blows. Maces and swords, colorful helms, shields riven and cast aside. These shall we see at the start of the battle. This gives a great description on how a knight should operate in battle and the mindset they have. Another poem from Bertrand de Born, he shows the importance of the relationship of king and knight. In the poem, he doesn't like the new king, King Philip. He says, "Without fire and without blood, waged for a king of no great power, who is scorned and made a liar. War is then no noble word, yet he can just lie around and grow fat." Knights want a strong leader because they are putting their lives on the line for these kings.
The role of serfs in feudalism. The serfs were a large and crucial part of feudalism. They were peasants responsible for the farming and upkeep of lands, and sometimes cooking and cleaning for the lord's manors. Looking again at the social structure of feudalism, serfs, or peasants, were the lowest class, but a key role in maintenance. Serfs and peasants made up 90% of the social class in feudalism. Serfs had no legal rights to the lands they worked on. Although they could not be sold or traded as property, they often came as a package deal when lords were awarded a manor. Strict rules with their lords made it difficult for them to move away from their manor. Many generations of serf families remained stuck in the cycle of poverty. The 14th century saw a decline in serfdom and feudalism due to two causes: the Black Plague, which wiped out about 60% and estimated 50 million people across Europe, as well as the Peasant Revolt, sparked by King Richard II's proposed poll tax on the serfs. The revolt lasted less than a month. Although the revolution failed socially, they were successful in ending the unnecessary and unrealistic taxes on the lower class. Regardless of your social class, all could be subject to trial by ordeal. Trial by ordeal meant that the accused would not be overseen by a jury or put on trial with witnesses and evidence. Instead, they would participate in the assigned risky task, which would prove their guilt or innocence in the eyes of God as determined by members of the clergy. These trials were supernatural by design and were believed to determine God's verdict. For trial by fire, the accused went through a religious ceremony in which a hot iron was blessed by holy water and sacred words were spoken, leading to the accused carrying the hot iron 9 feet. If the accused were charged with a particularly heinous offense, the iron carried would be heavier. Their hand was then bandaged, and if after 3 days showed signs of festering, the accused was found guilty. Trial by hot water also included religious ceremony, where a kettle of water was blessed with holy water and specific prayers were said. The accused was to put their hand in a pot of boiling water and typically retrieve a stone from the bottom of the pot. If the offense were greater, the accused was to submerge their arm up to the elbow. As with trial by fire, the wound was then bandaged and assessed by a priest after 3 days for infection. If the wound healed cleanly, the accused was found innocent. If not, they were found guilty. Some trials by hot water required the accused to remove their arm from the water completely unscathed. Trial by cold water was said to be representative of baptism. The accused was submerged completely in water, and if they floated, they were seen as being rejected by the water, and therefore God, and found guilty. If they sank, they were seen as being accepted by God and found innocent. It is a myth that those who sank died, as surviving records indicate those who sank were retrieved before actually drowning. As such, this method of trial had more outcomes of innocence due to manipulating the trial. Trial by combat, also known as wager of battle or judicial duel, allowed one to fight against their accuser with the understanding that God would only allow the just to win. These trials usually consisted of an appointed fighter or champion on both the side of the accused and the accuser to fight until disabled or until their death. Trials by ordeal began around 1166 with Aziz of Clarendon and were officially banned in 1215 by the Fourth Lateran Council as called by Pope Innocent III. Trial by combat, however, was not banned until 1819. These examples include trial by ordeal being directly written into a law by Aziz of Clarendon and the statutes of William the Conqueror. Trial by ordeal was important during feudalism because it reflects on the people's Christian belief structure and shows how the clergy were involved with law, order, and judgment. Influence and conclusion. The sectioning out of land led to large groups loyal to one lord and allowed lords to build a following and military base. Just like with your modern-day pyramid scheme, a large lord could give out a section of land to a vassal. That vassal can then portion out that section of land even further to other vassals, leading to a larger base that ultimately are loyal with their oaths to the higher lord. Knights gained notoriety through military endeavors and were able to hold more land. Knights required certain amounts of money in order to become knights, as they needed their own armor and weapons. The more famous the knight, the more likely they were to own land. Serfs' assignment to certain fiefs kept them in poverty and unable to change their class. As serfs were designated to pieces of land and could not move to other pieces of land despite not being property, they were stuck in poverty. The involvement of clergy members in judgments for legal matters resulted in unreasonable sentencing. Trials by ordeal were unfair in that they were based in the supernatural. Many outcomes were not based off of evidence, For more information, please see these works cited. Thanks for listening.